Hello, and welcome to this episode of Into the Killing. We turn back to October of 1989 to examine two intertwined events that seized national headlines. On the 6th of October, televangelist Jim Bakker, together with his wife Tammy Faye Bakker, was convicted on 24 counts of fraud. The couple had hosted the PTL Club on their own PTL satellite network, with PTL standing for Praise the Lord. Earlier, in 1987, Bakker and another preacher, John Wesley Fletcher, were accused of drugging and raping Jessica Hann, a 21-year-old church secretary. To keep her silent before the story went public, Bakker paid her $279,000. Shortly after the revelations, he resigned as head of the PTL Satellite Network and Heritage USA. He was investigated for fraud after it emerged that he had defrauded his followers of $158 million to fund his lavish lifestyle. A few weeks after his fraud conviction, he received a sentence of 45 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. He appealed, and in February 1991 his sentence was overturned, and he was resentenced to 8 years. He was released in 1994 after serving less than 4 years. During his imprisonment, Tammy filed for divorce. Bakker has maintained that the encounters with Jessica Hann were consensual and that he was set up. He was never charged with sexual assault. In 1993, he returned to television with The Jim Bakker Show, and more than 20 years later, he remained a host, often focusing on what he calls the second coming and the end of days. In October 1989, the World Series pitted the San Francisco Giants against the Oakland Athletics, two franchises separated by the San Francisco Bay. It marked the first crosstown World Series. Game 3 was scheduled to begin at 5:35 p.m. Pacific Time on October 17, 1989, at Candlestick Park. Oakland led the series 2-0. At 5:04 p.m., ABC was broadcasting from the ballpark when, suddenly, an earthquake struck, measuring 6.9 on the Richter scale. The quake interrupted the game and the broadcast. In October 1989, a sequence of disasters dominated headlines across North America. A catastrophic earthquake struck the San Francisco Bay Area, causing $6 billion in damage, claiming 63 lives and injuring 3,757 people. Candlestick Park was damaged and lost power, so the remainder of the World Series was postponed. It resumed 10 days later, on October 27th, and concluded the next day with the Oakland Athletics winning the series. That World Series would later be remembered as the Earthquake Series. On October 8, 1989, two families, the McGrath and Lears, were riding in a hay wagon in rural New Brunswick, Canada, heading to a Thanksgiving Day reunion at the community center in Cormier Village. The wagon was pulled by a tractor, with two pickup trucks following along the shoulder. They were just over 300 feet from the center when a logging truck carrying 6 tons of hardwood began to pass, lost control, and tipped over, spilling its load onto the wagon. 13 people, including 5 children, were killed and 45 were injured. The tragedy made headlines across North America. On October 22, 1989, in St. Joseph, Minnesota, Jacob Wetterling, 11, lived with his parents, Jerry and Patty, and his siblings. He was the second oldest of 4 children and idolized basketball star Michael Jordan, sharing his February 12th birthday with the Bulls legend, though he also loved hockey. October 22nd was an unseasonably warm Sunday. That morning, Jacob and his father went fishing and returned home at noon to watch the Minnesota Vikings play the Detroit Lions. During halftime, Jacob, his father, and his siblings joined neighborhood kids for a simplified game of football. That evening, Patty and Jerry attended a dinner party. The next day, Monday, was Professional Development Day for educators, so the Wetterlings had the day off from school. Amy Wetterling was sleeping over at a friend's home, so Jacob and his 11-year-old friend Aaron Larson were planning to watch the two youngest Wetterling children just before 9 o'clock. Jacob invited everyone to a dinner party and proposed biking to a nearby convenience store to rent a movie. Jerry agreed, but the youngest, Carmen, didn't want to go. Jacob arranged for a neighbor to watch her while they were out. Jacob, his 11-year-old friend, and Trevor, his 10-year-old brother, hopped on their bikes and rode to the store. There, they rented the comedy The Naked Gun and began the ride home. On the way back, a brief sponsor message interrupted the moment. Bakker offers chef-prepared meals that are ready to eat in 2 minutes, with no prep, cooking, or cleanup. The weekly menu features more than 35 options, including Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, and vegan choices. There are more than 60 add-ons each week, such as breakfasts on the go, lunches, snacks, and beverages. You can pause or reschedule deliveries at any time. Bakker celebrates Earth Day all month, highlighting meals with the Earth Month Eats badge for the lowest carbon footprint. Visit factormeals.com and use the code LISTED50 to receive 50% off your first box and 20% off your next. This spring, Bakker offers a practical way to eat well when time is tight. At about 9:15, on a quiet stretch of road with no houses, a man in dark clothes wearing a stocking over his face emerged from the ditch and announced that he had a gun, ordering the three to stop. They offered him the videotape, but he knocked it aside. Aaron flashed a flashlight, and the beam fell on the man, revealing the gun as the kidnapper ordered them to stop shining it. He then commanded them to lie face down. He asked their ages, and they all answered. He told Jacob's 10-year-old brother Trevor to rise and run into nearby woods, warning that if he looked back he would be shot. Trevor obeyed. The man then ordered Jacob and Aaron to turn over, examined them, and finally told Aaron to run into the woods. Aaron fled into the forest, and when Trevor and Aaron looked back, Jacob and the kidnapper were gone. The two boys rushed to the whaling house and told a neighbor girl watching Carmen that Jacob had been taken. The girl called her father, who alerted the emergency services and then contacted Patty and Jerry at their dinner party. Patty and Jerry hurried home, where the sheriff was already questioning Aaron and Trevor. The boys recalled that the kidnapper spoke with a raspy voice. Police scoured the area, but the trail went cold. Dan Roger recalled a small dark blue car pulling into his driveway around the kidnapping time and leaving again. Another car had entered earlier, but it was different, and the first resembled a Monte Carlo-type vehicle. The next day, Jacob remained missing. Investigators found tire tracks and footprints and took plaster casts. The FBI joined the case and concluded the tire marks matched one of 2 Sears tires. Investigators also spoke with 2 boys who had seen a man watching the whaling house in the week before the abduction, supporting the possibility that the children were targeted. 4 days after the abduction, a television program profiled the case and announced a reward of $100,000 from the St. Paul area. Tips continued to pour in, yet no trace of Jacob appeared. The longest week of the wailing child's life passed, and Jacob remained missing. The FBI released a profile of the kidnapper, a white man in his mid-20s to mid-30s, with a low-skilled job and limited public contact, possibly acne or facial scars, and a probable history of sexual offenses. Hundreds of tips arrived, but no arrests followed. Comfort often seems scarce when laundry piles up, but Miracle-Made sheets change that. We spend 1/3 of our lives asleep, so choosing bedding that feels exceptional matters. I've always dreaded laundry, which makes Miracle-Made sheets a welcome indulgence. These sheets use silver-infused fabrics inspired by NASA, delivering thermoregulating properties that keep you at the right temperature through the night. Sleep has always been a challenge for me, yet since switching to Miracle-Made, nights have grown noticeably better. Because the silver prevents bacterial growth by up to 99.7%, the sheets stay cleaner and fresher, and laundry loads are reduced by as much as 3 times. For years, I've bought nicer sheets, and Miracle-Made has surprised me with a price that's far more reasonable than other brands I've tried. Plus, they're gentle on the skin, so you sleep on clean sheets that won't clog pores. If you're curious to try, visit Miracle-Made's site and explore their sheets today, with savings of over 40% on orders. At checkout, you can use a promo to receive 3 towels and save an additional 20%. Miracle-Made backs their product with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try them risk-free. Upgrade your sleep by visiting the site and applying the promo to claim freebies and substantial savings. In the wake of Jacob's kidnapping, investigators released a sketch of a white man in his 50s with white hair and weighing about 200 pounds, seen near the convenience store where Jacob's brother and friends had visited that night. 6 days later, 2 more sketches surfaced. One of a man who, 2 weeks after the abduction, was at the same store discussing the case. Another of a man who attempted to kidnap a boy in a Minneapolis suburb about 75 miles from St. Joseph. Tips continued to come in, but no arrests followed, as profilers believed the kidnapper had committed other sexual offenses. Investigators looked for similar crimes in the region. They uncovered a Cold Spring, Minnesota case from 10 months earlier. Jared Cairo, a 12-year-old boy, was abducted on the evening of January 13, 1989. A man in a car approached Jared to ask for directions, then grabbed him, produced a gun, forced him into the back seat, and drove to an isolated area outside town to sexually assault him. He released Jared after driving back toward town, telling him to run or he would shoot. Jared described the attacker as a white man in his mid-30s to early 40s, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing around 170 pounds, with broad shoulders and a gut, dark hair, a large nose, and large ears. The assailant wore a camouflage shirt, military-style pants, a brown baseball cap, a gray vest, and black boots. The vehicle was a dark blue, late-model 4-door with a blue interior, and a police scanner was in the car. Jared also believed the man was local because he knew the area well. 11 months after the assault, Jared spoke with the FBI, and officials believed the same man who kidnapped Jacob in 1990 may have been responsible. The Paynesville police chief, coordinating with the investigators, noted that Paynesville lies about 30 miles southwest of St. Joseph, and that the route passes through Cold Spring. He explained that beginning in September 1886, there had been a series of at least 8 sexual assaults on teenage boys, all aged 12 to 16, all occurring downtown before the assaults. In each case, the attacker found victims downtown, followed them, grabbed them, and warned them not to turn around or risk being shot. 2 boys rode their bikes when a man armed with a knife grabbed one. The other boy fled to seek help. He sometimes disguised himself by smearing mud on his face or by wearing a mask. On May 17, 1987, he wore a brown baseball cap that fell off and was later collected by the police. The children of Painesville grew terrified and nicknamed him Chester the Molester. The Painesville police had not yet made an arrest. February 17, 1990, would have been Jacob Wetterling's 12th birthday, but he remained missing. His mother, Patty Wetterling, used the moment to found the Jacob Wetterling Foundation to prevent and end stranger abductions. Through supporters, she raised over $200,000, and the foundation lobbied for laws to protect children. In September 1994, the United States Congress passed the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act, requiring every state to create a registry of sexual offenders and those who committed crimes against children. Another decade passed, and Jacob's whereabouts remained a mystery. In 2004, investigators focused on a person of interest who lived near the abduction site, Dan Razier. He said he saw cars pull into his driveway that day. Razier admitted he had nothing to do with Jacob's disappearance, but he stayed on the radar. Police devised a plan to coax a confession and asked Patty Wetterling to speak with him. She agreed. In October 2009, 20 years after Jacob went missing, Patty spoke with Razier directly, asking if he had kidnapped Jacob as she had always suspected. He denied involvement at the time, but the police remained unconvinced. On the 1st of July, 2010, they searched his property, digging in areas of interest, but found nothing of significance. 2 more years passed with little progress. Then, in 2012, the case began to move again. If Jacob had been alive, he would have been 34 in 1989. The era's pop culture reflected the times. In 1987, the top films were Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Dead Poet Society. By 2012, the top films were The Avengers, Skyfall, and The Dark Knight Rises. The era's top singles in 1989 were Look Away by Chicago, My Prerogative by Bobby Brown, and Every Rose Has Its Thorn by Poison. In 2012, they were Somebody That I Used to Know by Goat You featuring Kimbra, Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen, and We Are Young by Fun featuring Janelle Monáe. Popular books published in 1989 included Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth and John Grisham's A Time to Kill. Michael Rosen's We're Going on a Bear Hunt was among favorites. In 2012, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, The Light Between Oceans by M. L. Stedman, and 50 Shades Freed by E. L. James drew readers. 1989 was a big year for television, with The Simpsons, Seinfeld, and Baywatch debuting. In 2012, Gravity Falls, Arrow, and Veep premiered. In 1989, Prince of Persia for the Apple II, Mega Man 2 for the NES, and Golden Axe for the Sega Genesis appeared. In 2012, Journey, Borderlands 2, and Mass Effect 3 arrived. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, known as the BCA, investigated Jared Schreck's case, keeping the sweatshirt he wore on the night of the attack for DNA testing. The analysis revealed 2 DNA profiles. one more prominent than the other. Shrek could not be excluded as a contributor to the less prominent profile, but was excluded as the source of the more prominent profile, leaving investigators confident in ruling out 99% of suspects. Only about 5% of the public had DNA profiles in CODIS and state databases, so a match would be a rare stroke of luck. Still, no match appeared. In March 2014, police tested a hat found at a Paynesville molestation site, pulled DNA from it, and found traces belonging to 4 people, one of whom matched Jared's kidnapper. The following year, investigators compared the sweatshirt DNA with an early suspect in both Jared's assault and the Chester molester case. Danny Heinrich became a person of interest 3 days after Jared's assault, proposed by a Paynesville deputy who knew him. Heinrich grew up in Paynesville, a small city with a population of just over 2,200, and he had a criminal record for burglary and driving under the influence, which made the deputy familiar with him. Heinrich also matched Jared's description of the attacker: dark hair, a sturdy frame, and he drove a 1987 dark blue 4-door Mercury Topaz, similar to the car Jared described. The deputy noted that the attacker wore military-style clothing, and Heinrich had served in the National Guard. 2 days after Jacob's kidnapping, a Paynesville teenager told investigators he had seen Chester the molester assault 2 other teenage boys, describing him as quick, military, and proficient. At one point, he grabbed a kid off his bicycle. At that stage, police were not looking into any connection between the Paynesville attacks and Jacob's disappearance. On December 16, 1983, nearly 2 months after Jacob went missing, FBI agents interviewed Danny Heinrich, and he claimed not to be involved in the attack on Jared or Jacob's disappearance, saying he could remember what he was doing on those days. Heinrich was not charged at that time and remained one of many persons of interest. On January 8, 1990, Paynesville's chief of police advised investigators that Heinrich was a suspect. 4 days later, Heinrich was interviewed by a police officer and an FBI agent, and he provided his shoes and samples of his body hair. 3 days after that, he allowed police to take the rear tire of his blue 1982 Ford EXP hatchback, which were compared with tire castings found at Jacob's abduction site, and proved similar, though the FBI could not say for certain that the tracks came from those tires. The same day, Heinrich took a polygraph exam, and he showed signs of deceit. That night, police began to tail Heinrich. As he drove, he tried to lose them by making sudden turns, and after about 20 minutes he turned off his lights and eluded pursuit. The surveillance continued for another 2 days and was finally halted when Jared was kidnapped. Heinrich drove a 1987 Mercury Topaz, but he replaced it with a Ford EXP in March 1989. The police tracked down the Topaz and had Jared sit in it, more than a year after his kidnapping. Asked how similar the car was to his kidnappers on a scale from 1 to 10, he said it was around 8 or 9. 8 days later, officers searched Heinrich's home, and among the evidence were 2 police scanners, a detail Jared remembered about the Topaz. On January 26, 1990, the police had Heinrich stand in a lineup and photographed 6 men. The lineup was shown to the 2 boys who had reported seeing a suspicious man near the Whaling house, but they did not identify any of the 6 men. When Jared viewed the photos, he said 2 men could be his abductor, rating their likelihood from 1 to 10. Heinrich scored 4, the other men 7. The lineup had problems. Trevor and Aaron, who were with Jacob when he was kidnapped, were not shown, nor were any Painesville molestation victims. And the two boys who had seen a man watching the Whaling House were shown the photo lineup, though there was no evidence linking that man to the kidnapping. A distinctive detail was the kidnapper's raspy voice, yet none of the witnesses ever heard Hinrich speak. On February 9, 1990, investigators learned from the FBI that fibers on Jared's snowsuit matched fibers from Hinrich's Mercury Topaz. That same day, Danny Hinrich was arrested for Jared's kidnapping and sexual assault. He was interrogated while intoxicated and proclaimed his innocence, claiming the FBI was setting him up. FBI profilers observed the session for reasons not documented and concluded Hinrich was unlikely to be the kidnapper, so he was released without charges. The investigation continued for months. The FBI compared his shoes to footprints at Jacob's kidnapping site, but the results were inconclusive, and Hinrich was dropped as a suspect in 1991. All property seized the previous year was returned to him. In 2015, 25 years after his arrest and release, a DNA sample taken from the hairs he had given in 1990 matched the DNA on Jared's sweatshirt and the baseball cap from the Chester molester case. However, the sexual assault statute of limitations had expired, so charges could not be filed. Nonetheless, investigators believed the man who attacked all the teenage boys was the kidnapper, and most likely the same person. A search of Hinrich's home uncovered a sizable trove of child pornography and videos he had recorded of children in everyday activities. Yet there was no evidence tying him to Jacob's disappearance. 26 years had passed since Jacob Wheeling vanished, leaving his family without answers. Desperate for closure, they agreed to a controversial plea. If Hinrich confessed to Jacob's murder and disclosed the location of the body, he would avoid a murder charge and plead guilty to a single count of receiving child pornography, with a sentence of up to 20 years. Hinrich accepted the deal. On August 31, 2016, he led investigators to a Painesville farm near his former residence. After digging, human remains were recovered. Dental tests on September 3rd confirmed the remains belonged to 11-year-old Jacob Wheeling. 3 days later, the 52-year-old Hinrich testified about the night Jacob disappeared. He recalled driving along a dead-end road, seeing 3 boys on bicycles, pulling into a nearby driveway, then waiting in his car as they passed. When the boys approached, he exited the vehicle, wore a mask, brandished a revolver he claimed was unloaded, confronted them, and restrained Jacob before forcing him into the passenger seat while the other 2 fled. They drove to a gravel pit outside Painesville. He uncuffed Jacob, took him to a grove, and, according to his account, harmed the boy for about 20 to 30 minutes before returning toward the car as a police car neared. In a panic, he loaded 2 rounds into the revolver and ordered Jacob to turn around for a supposed restroom break. The weapon clicked on the first attempt. He fired again, and Jacob collapsed. The confession formed the core of the case, guiding Hinrich's negotiated disposition. Danny Hinrich returned home for a short while, and then buried the body in a shallow grave. About a year later, he came back to the area with a flashlight, and he found Jacob's red reflective jackets protruding from the dirt. He cleared away some soil until Jacob's remains appeared as bones, and he boxed as many bones as he could find along with the clothes into a garbage bag. Crossing the highway, he went to the farm where the remains would eventually be found, dug another hole, placed the bones and the jacket inside, and covered them with earth. A month later, Heinrich was sentenced to the maximum of 20 years for one count of receiving child pornography. At the sentencing, Judge John Tannum explained that the crime and the sentence were not only about the pornography. They were about changing the lives of many children and parents who had prayed for Jacob's return and who had feared what might emerge from the darkness. Jacob Wooling's story touched every child in the community and beyond, for he had become a symbol of innocence lost in small towns and in cities across Minnesota and further afield. At the time of this writing, Heinrich, now aged 61, is serving his sentence at the Federal Medical Center Devens in Massachusetts. He would be eligible for parole in 2032, after serving 17 years, by which time he would be 69, though release remains unlikely. As part of the plea deal, Heinrich could be designated a sexual predator, a status that could keep him imprisoned indefinitely. In 2018, the interim sheriff of the county where Jacob was abducted condemned the original investigation, saying there were 20 things investigators bungled. A major fault, he asserted, was the FBI profiler's conclusion that Heinrich was not a viable suspect, and he noted that several agents were too inexperienced to lead the inquiry. One investigator who worked on the case called that analysis unfair. On September 25, 2016, 27 years after Jacob Wooling's murder, his family held a memorial service that drew more than 2,800 people. 11 candles were lit to represent each year Jacob spent on Earth. Patty spoke to those who gathered, saying that they would have endured the long years without the love and support of everyone there. This account underscores the enduring impact of a community torn by a grievous crime and the lasting effort to uncover the truth behind it.